Hi everyone, my name is Swearingen. I'm the Director of Insight at United Way of the Bay Area. So many of you guys have probably heard of United Way. I represent the Bay Area chapter. And as my title probably very vaguely implies, I do anything from data analytics to very basic data visualizations for the organization research. And anything that provides insight to our organization, across the organization, and to our community partners. So what I want to share with you guys a little bit, let me put my little time tracker on, is a little bit about how we at United Way have been able to leverage some of the growing data that we're starting to collect to drive decision making and to drive impact in the communities that we serve. And as a lot of you guys know, a lot of companies are starting to collect more and more data, more and more types of data. Nonprofits and social sector organizations are starting to do the same. But the data that we collect is only as good as how we're able to present it and communicate it to the stakeholders that are actually the decision makers and the community changers. So this has been something that has been both challenging and something that's been very exciting to provide new insights. And like I mentioned before, while we do some more advanced statistical analyses at the organization to really answer some of those tough questions, what I'll probably focus on more in this presentation is a little bit of the analytics that we do for the lay audience and the stuff that really kind of drives the discussions within the organization. What I hope that you guys will walk away from this is an understanding of the processes that might drive metrics across organization and within community partners. And then example of some visualizations and reports that worked for us and things that you might be able to take back. And then lastly, some lessons learned on building a data-driven organization. So let's get started. So as many of you guys are probably already aware of, there is a less ideal data environment within a different organizations or companies and a more ideal data environment. And what that looks like, specifically a less ideal data environment, is where you see partial views of data. You may not be able to see the whole picture from the information that's being collected. Someone has ownership of this over here and the other people have this, and you really can't see what the story is. And there's disparate data systems. Different people are collecting different data for the same cause or the same program, or inconsistent reports. So I know this happens a lot, and this happened a lot a few years ago at United Way as well, where there was one number here and another number there, and no one really understood what was the true story. Or the information is just not accessible. Like, people outside of the engineers, the analysts, don't really know what's happening. And on the opposite end of the spectrum is a more ideal data environment. And what you might see from this environment is data that's more visually representative. It's actionable, it inspires change, and it's easy to access and accessible. People from all across the organization can get the insights that they need when they want them. And the efforts are coordinated, and this one I'll probably stress a little bit more throughout the presentation because this one is really important. If you don't get champions, you're not going to get use out of your information, and that's what I try to focus on in my work, because I can sit there and play in the numbers all day long, but it's not really meaningful if no one else gets it or understands what the story is. And that's why it's important to work with others to really understand. And however, there are many challenges, and some of them are systems issues. You may have data in many different places. It's hard to streamline all of that information. That kind of stuff requires different platforms that really pull, those different pieces together. You're faced with having to build accountability. And that's like having transparency, especially in nonprofit organizations and social sectors. You have to have transparency and show people what you're actually doing. And then also using data to drive decisions. This is really important. Everyone's always talking about data-driven organizations or data-driven companies. And the third challenge is creating a culture. So this one's super hard, because even if you have data and information, when do you, actually, start to get people to change the way they're thinking about that information and start utilizing it in their regular meetings and discussions, and that could be a huge challenge. So I want to talk a little bit about United Way, because this is a case study or case example. And specifically, United Way, just like a full disclosure, United Way kind of sits, we're not exactly in this ideal data environment, so I want to put that out there, but we're moving towards that direction. We sit somewhere closer to an ideal data environment than we did before, but I'm going to talk to you kind of how we got there. I mean, before we were way at the non-ideal end. So for those of you guys, how many of you guys know of, have you guys heard of United Way? Yeah, okay, oh good, we've got a little fan club here. So United Way's mission is, or this particular United Way of the Bay Area is trying to cut poverty in the Bay Area by 2020. And I won't spend too long on this because I really want to give you guys some stuff to take from it. But they have the Collective Impact Movement, where they're working with over 160 organizations across the Bay Area that provide services in either health, education, or basic needs. And so we're trying to collect all this data to see how we're moving the needle. And then there's systems changing programs that United Way actually houses that all address poverty. And then there's the policy and advocacy work, and then the civic engagement work, the volunteerism stuff. And those are all big branches of what makes up United Way and where we pull data from. And here are some examples that I wanted to show you guys of how people across the organization are beginning to leverage these insights, the data that we already collect, to really drive change. So the first example is there was the last election within San Francisco and in Oakland. They were trying to push for the minimum wage to be increased. So they took the data that we already had that talked about the self-sufficiency that someone would need to survive in these different counties and what the current minimum wage was. So this was an interactive thing that they were able to use to kind of drive that policy. And then this is a community data library. People are constantly being asked, like, how do I tell the story of why poverty matters and why people should get involved when the data sits all over the place? You have stuff from the census, BLS, just all these other different sources. So this was all pulled together in a Tableau dashboard to kind of show across all these different variables, what does it look like? And there's filters on there so you can see by the previous years. And then lastly, our Jobs Plus program, they pull data from Salesforce actually, and this is a live connection into this dashboard to be able to monitor how different youth are being hired across different community-based organizations that they're working with so that they can better address the needs. Those are quick examples. So to get to that place that we're at, that's kind of fast forwarding, and let's go back. It was a phased approach that we had, and the first phase was building data champions. So making sure that it was not just me that was like, doing a data tap dance at work all the time, but getting other people that took ownership of the information, were excited about the information and wanted to share it, and then testing out different visualizations. So as I mentioned before, the data, you might have a lot of data, but it's only as good as how you can communicate it to people and present it to people in a way that's very meaningful. And then finding ways to leverage the data, so giving people avenues where they can start utilizing this different information in different ways. And then lastly, building sustainability. So now you have all these great processes and visualizations, like how do you get people to continue to use them? How do you make sure that they're constantly up to date? So let's get started. Let's go on this little road, this journey. So the first one is building data champions. And so you can have two options in your organization or your company or wherever you're at. You can have centralized data where everyone has to come to that one person or that one department to get the insights. And sometimes there's a disconnect. Sometimes people feel like they can't get that information as quickly, or it's not their information, so why should they care about it? It's not their job, it's yours. Or you can have, folks or people, or for me, one person, to provide data, training, support, and tools and platforms for others to be able to pull from it. So like the marketing department has their own dashboard, or program teams each have the information in a platform that makes sense to them so that they have ownership of it and they can begin to share out some of these insights and draw some of the insights from what they're seeing that's happening in the program. And the next one is launching visualization. So now you got, one of the things I didn't mention about this is that specifically in United Way's case, we do have a data users team, which are just people that came into the organization to manage the different various databases that we built up their skills to really be excited about it and use new systems. So they're called the data users. So now we have these data users. Now we wanted to create some visualizations that really mattered. And one example I'll show you, one of many, is this dashboard. So this is for one of our systems changing programs called SparkPoint, and it brings together agencies from a particular county to provide services to low-income people on one site, so they can get help with getting a job and also getting applying for benefits all in one center. So they're all collecting all of this information and they're putting it now into this system where they can begin to kind of tell the story of how these people are progressing. And so we built out this dashboard for each of our programs, and they all start with impact to say how the program's doing, and then participants to describe the demographics, and then engagements, which kind of talks about the how the program is growing and enhancing. And you can see here, and this is just a static image of it, but these are interactive dashboards that people can hover above. They can click on certain things that expand, and then also there's filters here so they can see it for previous years in different counties. And this was really important because now we're giving this information to the people, like to the program partners, to the staff members themselves, and saying, here's this insight, let's see what we can draw from it. But I will say this looks super simple, but it took a year and a half to get to all of these dashboards, not because it was difficult to design, but because everyone had a different opinion on what should be included in this. If you talk to our leadership team or board members, they had a different opinion on what really mattered. Our program staff wanted something else, so it was a difficult conversation to have. Just as a reference, before I got here, this is what the dashboard looked like. So, it's really hard to see what the insights are for this particular program. There's a lot of text here. I don't know where to zoom in on. So it was a lot of information, and so it's really hard to drill it down to 5 key points that people really care about and really want to see, and that drive people to want to do something. And then leveraging data. So the other part is giving people avenues for being able to leverage the data, and I'll go more specifically because that's probably super vague by saying that. But the 3 avenues that we saw was program improvement, which is kind of our core programs that we run. So giving this 2-on-1 call center, one of our core programs, access to their data, like a live version of all that information. They have over 1 million records in there, which can seem overwhelming. But giving them Tableau as a platform so that they can actually pull their data in here. And after 3 days, this is what the girl came up with. And this is really cool because what she did is she was having a conversation with a legislative member, and who is responsible for these different area codes in that district, about what the different needs, what people were calling for. So 211's kind of like 411, but for basic needs and services for low-income people or homeless people. And so the baby blue, I don't know if you can see that, but the baby blue is housing and shelter. And one of the cool insights from here was she was able to show him, look, in 2010, we saw a huge increase in this housing and shelter, people calling for housing and shelter, which surpassed the tax services. So this was a really cool thing that she was able to do pretty quickly by having, the tools at her disposal. And then organizational management, the example I have, yeah, that's me. I like pictures of myself. The example I have from there is we do an opinion poll survey with all the people that we're engaged with, and this is just a static version. If I had more time, I'd kind of go through it with you guys. But this is also another story point or dashboard. Each of these tabs covers a different question. And one of the questions we asked all of our donors, community partners, partner agencies is how likely are you to refer United Way, just to get kind of like try to do things differently. But the main point in this is that when this was presented, it has a lot of filters. If you go on any of the other tabs, where you can look at people by age, by different demographics, by whether or not they're a donor or volunteer, and you can look at all these questions by that. And so this was given to everyone in our organization, primarily our leadership team members, so they can really begin to understand how their branch of the organization is impacting the way people see us, and draw some conclusions. So giving them something interactive that they can play with, and really just kind of take ownership rather than like me telling everyone what to think. And then the last piece is thought leadership. So we do this survey every year since 2005, and it's a nonprofit post survey where we survey all these different nonprofit agencies about how they're faring and if they feel like they're no longer surviving given the economic climate. And so normally these are presented as reports, static reports. No one ever really looks at them. Occasionally one or two people will ask me for the data by their county. So what we did this year is we made it interactive. So all these different agencies got to have this interactive dashboard. So each of these tabs answers a different question that was on the survey, and there's a bunch of filters on there so that they can play in it and see the data by their county and really begin to draw insights and do whatever they want to do with the information. And so now that you've got an idea of how you can get people to leverage it in different ways, the biggest trick is to get people to make sure that they continue. So rather than this being a one-time deal, how do you get folks to continuously be excited about it, or the people who are building it to continue to update it? One example I'll pull from is Community Data Library I showed you guys a glimpse of earlier, which was a dashboard of all these different indicators across, broken down by the Bay Area and in California and in the US. There's, to my knowledge, no way to kind of streamline that information into the dashboard, because that stuff isn't really regularly, like you can't find out, I don't know, what is this showing? Well, I guess you can find out unemployment rate on a regular basis, but some of these other indicators don't come out as regularly, so it wouldn't make as much sense. So how do you make sure people are still using this information and it's still up to date for them and it's still relevant? So that's something that, it's a challenge still for us to kind of keep the momentum going, I guess. And so I know a lot of people go, well, what changes have you seen since all of this stuff was implemented? So here's kind of a summary of some of the big changes. We created more conversations about improvements that we could make. Namely, I'm always kind of like beating people on the head saying we don't have enough data, or the data's not clean, or we need to build better systems. So by providing this, people can actually start seeing, what the areas of improvement need to be, and then identifying issue areas and priorities. So if we see that there's an influx in calls for housing and shelter, but we don't have that many services in certain areas, then how do we begin to have those conversations about how to improve that? So those are some of the conversations that it led to. And then shared performance activities with stakeholders. So that's that accountability piece, being able to say, here's what we're doing, here's how we're doing it. And the key takeaways, right on time. The key takeaways are just making sure you allow time for building out these dashboards, building out, the insight that you're giving to folks, being able to leverage others. So getting data champions, that's super crucial. Getting people excited about it, because if people aren't invested into it, they're not going to use the products that you provide for them across the organization. And then just designing smart. A lot of these things are pretty basic. I could get all, crazy fancy on folks, but I really don't think people would see as much insight from it, rather than, really highlighting the key points and giving them some interactiveness within the dashboards. So that is the end of my quick little presentation. And if you guys Have any questions? Okay.
All right. Thank you. Sorry, we don't have.
Oh, sorry.